electoral assistance as a component of democratization assistance is a relatively new sector in cooperation with developing countries. I recall that until the end of the Cold War in the early 90s, the world was divided in two blocks, and democratization was not a subject of cooperation from the EU or from the Western donors in the developing world, particularly in Africa and other countries. And it's only in the early 90s that the European Union introduced the concept of conditioning development assistance to democratization, respect of human rights, as, let's say, core values that the end of the Cold War offered an opportunity to introduce these concepts in our relations with the developing world. In the beginning of this process, when elections started to be organized in developing countries, practically there was only the UNDP, an international organization, who was providing this type of assistance, and the European Union, through a joint task force that was established in the early 2000s, practically had only this as the single implementing partner. Now, ECES was established and it was branded as an European organization based here in Brussels, precisely because the founder of ECES, Fabio Bargiacchi, whom I have known since the days that he worked with me in the delegation in Mozambique in the early 2000s, he was always focused on wanting to work in elections, and he had identified this gap in let's say, the opportunities that the EU had for implementing assistance, electoral assistance. So ECES has been has had a lot of success in growing rapidly, addressing electoral assistance support from the European Union in many different countries, particularly in Africa, Middle East, and I see that this need is still very much there for the European Union to be able to rely on a partner that shares the EU values, that has a large number of its core and management team, former servants of the European Union, having worked for many years for the European Union, thus understanding also the political contexts in which these projects are developed, and therefore I think that the European Union will continue to rely on ECES, and this support through ECES in many different countries, I am convinced, is going to increase, because ECES, in addition to what I've just said, is there also to promote the visibility of the European Union. We don't want to compete with our donor, you know, to the detriment of its visibility, like many others do, particularly when we are talking about international organizations which see themselves as another, let's say, partner as the European Union. We see that, and the fact that we are a foundation gives us also a larger degree of autonomy in that respect, which is not always the case if you have implementing partners, international organizations of which often the host country is also a part of, and therefore we believe that we can retain a larger degree of independence and to play you know, an equal loyalty, let's say, to the donor and to the recipient in promoting the assistance in the electoral field, but always having in mind the objectives of deepening the democratization processes in these countries, because of course, you know, democracy cannot be achieved in a lifespan even of one generation or two. This needs a continued support, and that we build on the successive electoral processes to deepen the processes and therefore to gain the confidence also of the electorate, which is in the end the best assessor of an electoral process, is the degree of confidence that the electorate in a given country looks at its own elections. ECES is an organization which promotes the development assistance to make it, let's say, the election management bodies and the institutions who have the mandate to carry out elections, to carry it in the most transparent, the most, let's say, involving all sectors of the population. Of course, the results of the elections, it is something that is not really, let's say, in our scope. And each country will have, at a given moment, different elements that may contribute or may be appealing to populist parties or movements, let's say, to take advantage of at a given moment. We have seen this throughout history. It's not a new development. I think that this is something that needs to be addressed by you know, political parties and the institutions of given countries, having these values at heart and have important checks and balances in the constitutions of countries to ensure that events or circumstances that may be you know, taking place at a given moment are not confused to what are the main underlying principles that democracies should abide for. And here I think you have also in mind particularly developments in member states of the European Union. I think also the last results of the European elections were reassuring for most of us, because we saw that first of all a much higher degree of participation of the citizens, which until recently most of the European electorate considered European elections something that they were not really concerned about. I think that these elections were positive in passing this message. People understand when they have to mobilize themselves, and therefore the results, although there is a higher share of vote by more parties than until now, the bulk of the electorate has opted for parties which share the European values. I mean, 70%, I think, of all the parties, the MPs that will take place, their seats in the parliament, stem from parties sharing these values.